Hi, I'm Phillip Hu, and your host for How'd You Do That? I'm an advisor at Bullseye Admissions and an incoming freshman at Stanford University studying computer science and economics. This season on How'd You Do That, we're sitting down with our network of Bullseye advisors to ask them about their accomplishments, successes, failures, and college journeys. Do you want to know how to get into an Ivy League as a first-gen low-income student? Or how to get into Harvard for both undergrad and medical school? The medical school has a 2% acceptance rate. What about how to get into the music industry? Win a Fulbright scholarship? We're diving into all these impressive feats and more this season to ask our advisors, how'd you do that? Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of How'd You Do That with Bullseye Admissions Advisors. Today we're with Phillip, who is an urban planner and graduated from MIT. So Phillip, you talked a lot about kind of like finding what you ultimately want to do through a career. So could you walk us through how you ultimately came to the career path of urban planning?
Yeah, so when I was originally applying to schools, I was applying to architecture programs. It was like my lifelong dream and childhood dream to become an architect. Elementary school, middle school, and high school was kind of building up to that in a way. I really loved art and drawing and painting, but I also really enjoyed engineering and problem solving. So I thought architecture was this kind of intersection between the two. But at the moment that I was choosing between the schools that I was accepted at, I had to choose between Bachelor of Architecture programs, which are a 5 to 6 year kind of commitment. If you graduate with a Bachelor of Architecture, you can become a licensed architect right outside of school. These are very intensive programs where you spend most of your time just learning architecture and learning design. MIT was the kind of outlier because it didn't offer a Bachelor of Architecture, it just offered a Bachelor of Science in like architectural studies or something. And it wasn't ranked. It wasn't, on a fancy list of like, these are the best architecture programs. I knew it had a strong Masters of Architecture program, but I decided something inside me told me, hey, college is a time for you to explore beyond what you thought you were interested in. And it's a time to open up. You have time, just take a moment to explore outside of, high school. You're so used to being told what to do, of what courses to take. But finally in college, you can choose what to take. So I decided to go to MIT instead of going to Cornell or Rice, which offered the Bachelor of Architecture program. And another part was MIT. I really loved the community. I really wanted to be surrounded by people who weren't architects and learn from them. So at MIT, I started kind of taking a bunch of the architecture studios and courses, but I also had a kind of core curriculum of a lot of science courses such as physics and chemistry, and also multivariable calculus and other very STEMmy courses that you wouldn't get at another school. And these definitely challenged me to think in really, really different ways, and definitely taught me to be a better kind of problem solver and to look at problems slightly differently. While I really, really loved my architecture studios and I loved the process of designing, I started taking courses in urban planning and I instantly fell in love with it. It was always a thing that I probably should have known I was more interested in. I spent a lot of time playing SimCity and designing cities out of Legos, but for some reason I kind of gravitated toward architecture. At the time I didn't actually know that urban planning was a profession. I only really discovered that at MIT. So at that point, I was just kind of like, I can do a double major in architecture and urban planning. So I kind of pursued both paths kind of simultaneously. And my dream was still to go to Harvard GSD for architecture, which is supposedly the top program in architecture. I was very status obsessed, which you shouldn't be. At a certain point in junior or senior year, I was doing an internship at a really prestigious New York architecture firm, and I was designing a master bedroom closet for a billionaire penthouse overlooking Central Park. And at that moment, at around 8 p.m. on a normal day at an architecture firm, I asked myself, is this what I want to do with the rest of my life? Is this the type of impact I want to make? And at that moment, I was like, I think I want to focus more on urban planning. At MIT, I had the opportunity to do kind of combined bachelor and master program in urban planning. So I applied to that on a whim and surprisingly got in. Most students who go to the Master of City Planning program at MIT need multiple years of professional experience. So it was really incredible to work with and be classmates with these students who already had so much experience in the field, but they also thought of me as being really interesting because I was from kind of the MIT undergrads and they kind of have a weird reputation. And then I did an internship at the Boston Redevelopment Authority, which is the kind of planning department for the city of Boston. And when I started engaging with communities and learning from them, I realized this is kind of what I was really passionate about. I really loved hearing how people interacted with the city, what they thought of their cities, what they dreamed for their cities, what their problems are, and how I could solve it for them. At that moment, I kind of knew this is the type of impact I want to make. So kind of the summary started off with architecture, but because I decided at a moment for my college experience to explore a bit, I actually discovered something I was a lot more interested in. It wasn't a complete 180. I think of it more as like doing a slight 30-degree turn.
Cool. So could you walk us through like whether or not like urban planning is like an industry that you need to break into? Like personally, as someone who's just about to go into college, I don't have much background on urban planning. Like you said, I didn't really know it was a thing. So like if someone was interested, let's say architecture or urban planning or a related field, what is your biggest piece of advice for them?
Urban planning at its heart is a very interdisciplinary discipline. I know it's like kind of a buzzword to say interdisciplinary, but urban planning really requires you to be kind of curious about almost all aspects of the city. And cities are extremely complex kind of organisms in a way because it's made up of highly complicated people and all of us. Whether it is a big city like Boston or New York or a small town or even like a small town in a rural area, each of them has their own issues and concerns. You have to kind of understand complex issues from law, like land use law, to transportation, kind of engineering and how that works, to environmental and climate change, and also economic and housing policy, and also social and racial justice. And how do they all interact? How do you involve different people? So it's a very hard thing to kind of discover in like high school or kind of pursue. So I always advise students, I mean, if you're interested in urban planning, just think about all the cities that you've been to and just start reading more, learn news, be kind of involved. In a way, you can get into urban planning through a lot of kind of different paths. I've seen my classmates go from someone who was a film major and they really wanted to understand cities from kind of like an artistic point of view. There's people who are really interested in environmental sciences and also climate change. There are people interested in economics. And then there's people who are interested in design and architecture. So my advice for any high schooler kind of thinking about urban planning is just pursue things that you're interested in now. Not necessarily like, don't try to structure all of your extracurriculars or whatever's for urban planning. Just do what you love. I loved playing piano, I loved drawing and painting, and I loved engineering. So I did a lot of like science Olympiad and also robotics. And what's more important is those just give you the kind of skills and ways of thinking to help you later in life as you kind of explore more in depth of your interests. If you're interested in politics, great, that's a really fantastic way. If you're interested in environment and you want to start kind of a climate activism organization at your club, that's also great. If you just love painting and drawing like I did, definitely do that too. When I was in high school, I actually, if you're interested in architecture, I actually don't necessarily recommend pursuing a lot of architecture-focused extracurriculars. If you look at a lot of the requirements for architecture schools, they do not want to see architecture in your portfolio. So a portfolio is really important for your application because it demonstrates your way of thinking, your creative process. And most architecture schools would rather see sketches, drawings, paintings, photography, so more of the visual fine arts rather than any kind of CAD drawings, so computer-aided drafting or your Rhino models or AutoCAD models, because they're a little bit pretentious in a way that they feel like they need to teach you how to do architecture and you don't know how to do it before going to college.
So could you elaborate a little bit more about doing stuff just because you love it and how you think that contributed to your acceptance to MIT, Cornell, and Rice?
I think doing what you love is more important than trying to create the perfect set of extracurriculars, because when you're writing your essays, you just want to talk about something that you're genuinely passionate about. If you still aren't entirely sure and you just kind of intern at an architecture firm, but you're still a little bit lost, you might not get kind of the full experience out of it because you feel kind of out of the water, and it's a little bit harder to talk about kind of your contributions. If you just do what you love, eventually it gives you your, what I kind of call an application theme. This is something that drives you. It's less about the actual things like art, robotics, or whatever, but more about what do these represent as kind of your core values, and how do you want to represent that in your applications. And then the second, probably more important thing when compared to the applications is if you just like doing it, then you're going to put a lot of work and time into it because you love it. So I would just stay up until 2 a.m. doing my art projects just because I cared so much about making them amazing.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think there is a theme among advisors talking about helping their students get a theme in their college applications, which is a trend. And I think it's pretty true that, you want to make sure that you have a strong narrative, and that narrative is most likely going to be what you're passionate about and what you truly enjoy doing. Cool. So moving on to advising to students, what has been your favorite moment as a Bullseye advisor?
My favorite moments as a Bullseye advisor is whenever, after kind of asking a bunch of seemingly unimportant questions to my students, and I can see they're getting slightly annoyed or concerned, that they're all I'm doing is talking about myself and my family, and why am I not talking about all my activities and awards and how I should talk about my achievements in my essay. But there's always a light bulb moment. Sometimes it kind of gradually lights up. Sometimes it's instant, where after we talk about what's important to them, something kind of connects. And then naturally, the personal statement and the supporting kind of essays and what they're going to write about all kind of materialize. It's always amazing when I see my students finally start to see who they are. And I think that's my favorite part as working as an advisor, because this is a moment, a very difficult moment for every student to kind of look at yourself and reflect and say, what is important to me? So it's kind of like that moment I had in my architecture firm where you just have to stop and kind of ask yourself, do I actually like any of this? What do I want to do? And realize kind of this is what I should be doing. This is what I actually really like.
What do you think your previous experiences, what do you think, how have they shaped what you bring to the table as an advisor?
One of the greatest things about going to MIT and any school, and then also just working at different places, interning at different places, is you meet lots of different people, and a lot of them are successful in their own way. And understanding what they kind of define as success and looking at what their paths were, you realize that rarely people in high school said, I'm doing X thing, and then they just do X thing later in life, and that's it. People can constantly reinvent themselves. That's the value of going to college, is it teaches you to be open-minded, to be flexible, to keep what's important to you, your core values, really close, but let everything else and let opportunities come, and don't kind of say, oh, I don't want to do that because it doesn't fit into my life plan or whatever that is. Let your life plan flow.
What do you think is your proudest moment or experience with a student?
It's kind of cliche, but the moment that a student kind of submits their last applications and they look at kind of their early drafts and where they were kind of a few months before, feeling kind of really anxious and kind of lost, But then at the moment that they're submitting, they're like, I did it, I finished, it's done. And there's a sense of accomplishment that they've really grown from where they started as a writer, as a person. So I see myself beyond just as a college admissions advisor. I see myself just as kind of a mentor in general at this really important kind of inflection point in people's lives where they have to start kind of this journey to realizing who they are and how to kind of take it from there. Sometimes students come in with a lot of preconceptions about themselves, or like, I'm not really good at anything, or I don't see myself as having any kind of accomplishment or being special in any way. But by the end of the process, they do see something that's really special about them. And they're just, I think, so much more excited about going to college.
All right, well, thank you so much, Phillip, for sharing your experiences and insight with us. I hope everybody watching found something helpful from this episode. Wow, it's really clear from all the episodes that we've done so far that Bullseye has truly a very diverse and incredible cohort of advisors ready to help you with your college applications. From Phillip, who attended MIT and now is going into urban planning, we learned so much about discovering your passions through exploring these tangentially related fields and ultimately pursuing the path that feels the most right to you, whether that's because you feel like it's with the right group of people or you're making a social impact or whatever that might be. But it's important to know that, whatever path you're on is not going to be the path you're going to be on for the rest of your life. You always have that freedom and flexibility to pivot and try something new. So I hope you guys took something out of this episode, and we'll see you next week in the next episode of How'd You Do That?